the last line before the Reichstag. They said victory was close. We could almost smell it in the smoke and blood-soaked air. Berlin was only a breath away, hidden behind the gray curtain of gunpowder and clouds. But between us and that broken city stood the Seelow Heights, a line of fire and iron, the last desperate gasp of a dying empire. I still remember the way the mud clung to my boots that morning, cold, heavy, like it wanted to pull me down and keep me there forever. It wasn't mud, not really. It was soil and rain and blood and ash. That ground had swallowed too many men already, and it was hungry for more. We were the Third Shock Army. That's not a name you earn by accident. April of 1945, and we were pushing through the Oder front with everything we had left. I was a senior lieutenant by then, Andriy Koval, 26, born near Vinnytsia. Though I felt twice that age, and I'd seen things that could bleach the color from your soul. There weren't many of us left who remembered what green trees looked like without artillery shadows dancing through them. The night before the assault, I couldn't sleep. Most of us didn't. We sat around under torn canvas and broken stars, soaking wet from the endless drizzle that had turned the steppe into a swamp. The sky above us was low and angry, and even the wind carried whispers of something final. I sat with Danilo, my closest friend since Stalingrad. He was shorter than me, stocky, with a grin like he'd figured out how to cheat death and was just waiting for us to catch up. He had this old harmonica with a cracked reed, and he played a broken tune that sounded more like memory than music. We didn't talk much. What was left to say? We knew what came next. The Germans were dug in deep. Seelow wasn't just high ground. It was a fortress, laced with concrete bunkers, anti-tank guns, machine gun nests, and barbed wire so thick it looked like steel vines. And between us and those hills, mines, trenches, and a killing field soaked in cold rain. When the barrage started at 3 in the morning, it was like the sky fell open. Over 20,000 guns fired in unison, lighting up the horizon like the end of the world. But the Germans weren't sleeping. They knew we were coming. They pulled back just far enough to let our shells dig empty craters. When we moved in, they opened up with everything. It wasn't a charge. It was a crawl. Step by step through mud that swallowed your knees. Bullets like angry wasps. Shells that carved craters right in front of you, and sometimes beneath you. I saw men disappear into earth that boiled under fire. I saw medics cry and dig with bare hands to find someone screaming. And then I saw Danilo fall. He was right in front of me. One moment he was turning to shout something. I never heard what, and then his chest just opened like a door. No scream, no drama. Just silence. His harmonica slipped from his coat, and for a second, I thought about grabbing it. I didn't. I had to keep moving. We reached the barbed wire by crawling over the dead. That's not a metaphor. We climbed over bodies, theirs, and I felt bones break beneath my boots. The mud didn't care who you were. The wire tore at our uniforms, ripped open skin, but we pushed through because there was no other choice. I remember the moment I saw the pillbox. A concrete dome, ugly and silent except for the roar of the MG-42 that spat fire from its slit like a dragon guarding its treasure. It had pinned down half my unit, and there was no way forward until it was gone. I don't know what got into me. Maybe rage, maybe grief, maybe the cold realization that nobody was going to do it if I didn't. I crawled through a drainage ditch, soaking wet and full of muck. I moved slow, counting every breath. When I got close enough, I pulled the pin from my last grenade and tossed it through the firing slit like I was mailing death itself. The explosion was small, muffled, but the silence afterward was massive. We moved again. Somehow by nightfall, we were on the heights. We'd taken them, or what was left. Blackened trees stood like burnt fingers reaching up from the earth. The bunkers were smoldering wrecks. The ground steamed with blood and rain. And from up there, through the smoke and rain, I saw it. Berlin. It wasn't what I expected. No grand skyline, no towers gleaming in the sun. Just a wounded beast in the distance, broken, burning, waiting. We were so close, but I knew the worst was still ahead. Because men don't give up empires without dragging everything down with them. And that night, as I sat alone beside a burned-out half-track, listening to the distant thunder of retreating tanks and whispering mortars, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Fear. Not for myself. For what we'd become. and what waited for us in the ruins ahead. I didn't sleep that night either. No one really did. The wind howled through the shattered remnants of pine groves that once stood proud along the heights, now little more than splinters sticking from scorched earth like the bones of something ancient and broken. The rain hadn't stopped. It just changed moods, sometimes a mist, sometimes a cold slap. My greatcoat clung to me like a second skin, soaked through, heavy with grime and blood. The others around me didn't speak. We just sat or lay in the filth, eyes open, staring into the smoke, each of us wrapped in our own silence, our own ghosts. For me, it was Danilo's face wide-eyed in that final frozen second, and the harmonica lying half in the mud, half in the blood, as if it had died too. Orders came at dawn, though dawn was a loose term. Light never really broke through the cloud cover, just sort of seeped in, like it was too afraid to shine on what it might find. We were moving forward again, heading west, toward the twisted skeleton of what was once a proud city. But Seelow had cost us. Nearly a third of our battalion was gone, killed, maimed, or vanished into the craters and canals that pockmarked the battlefield like open wounds. And yet no one hesitated. No one questioned the next step. The war had consumed us so completely that we had become a part of it. Extensions of rifles and bayonets, blood vessels in the body of something ancient and cruel that needed to reach its destination no matter the cost. As we crossed what remained of the German outer defenses, we saw them more clearly. Not the enemy soldiers, we rarely saw them unless they were surrendering or dying, but the traces they left behind. Abandoned bunkers still reeked of grease and sweat, field kitchens with half-eaten rations, letters burned at the edges, written in precise, careful German script. Some of the younger guys took souvenirs, iron crosses, SS daggers, a Wehrmacht belt buckle, but I didn't touch any of it. It felt wrong, like stealing from ghosts. And besides, I didn't want anything weighing me down. I already carried too much. I carried Danilo. I carried the names of the others we'd left behind, scattered across the years like breadcrumbs we could never follow back. The countryside changed as we got closer to Berlin. Gone were the open fields and marshy ditches. Now there were villages, burnt, deserted, or hastily fortified, and signs of recent panic. We passed rows of civilian carts headed the other way, pulled by horses, oxen, sometimes even people themselves. Women with hollow eyes clutched children who cried without sound. Old men leaned on sticks, glaring as we passed. The air had shifted, less fire, more fear. We were close. Everyone knew it. You could feel it in your teeth, in the way the ground trembled even when no shells were falling. Something was ending. Then came the canals. They weren't supposed to be a problem. Command had maps, but the Germans had flooded entire districts around Berlin's eastern approaches, turning them into swamps and killing zones. Every bridge that wasn't demolished was mined. Crossing them meant crawling on your belly like an animal, one nerve-wracking inch at a time, listening for the click that never came until it did. We lost good men not to bullets, but to traps that were laid with the cold precision of someone who knew their end was coming and wanted to take as many with them as possible. We'd made it across one such canal near the village of Petershagen. There had been a brief skirmish, a few grenades, some sporadic fire, and then quiet. Too quiet. That was always worse than the gunfire. You knew something was watching, and that's when we found the children. A basement beneath a shelled-out school. Maybe 8 of them. Filthy, barefoot, eyes wide like animals caught in the light. The oldest couldn't have been more than 12. They had no food, no water, only each other and a rusted pot they used to catch the leaking rainwater from the cracked ceiling. None of us spoke German beyond the basics, but fear doesn't need translation. One of our medics, a kid named Yura from Odessa, knelt and gave them his last ration biscuit. One of the smaller boys flinched like he'd been struck. I don't know why that broke me, but it did. Something cracked deep inside, not loudly, not all at once, just a small, irreversible shift. We moved on. That night, we bivouacked near a crumbling estate house overlooking the next road into the capital. From the second floor, through a broken window, I saw the fires. Berlin burned. It was like a living thing in agony, black smoke pouring into the sky, punctuated by flashes of artillery and collapsing buildings. And even from miles away, you could hear it. Not clearly, more like a pulse. Distant heartbeat, slow, rhythmic, unnatural. Like the dying breaths of a giant. I stood there longer than I should have. Just watching, trying to understand what it meant to be so close to the end, and still feel so far from peace. In the hallway behind me, someone whispered a prayer. Not a loud one, just a single line. It wasn't in Russian. It wasn't even in Ukrainian. It was Yiddish. I didn't look back, didn't need to. I knew who it was. Meyer, our radio operator. He rarely spoke of his family, but I knew they were gone. Minsk, 1941. He still carried a photo of his sister, folded in four, soft at the edges. That night, after the rain eased up, I saw him slip it into the broken floorboards of the house. A kind of offering. Like leaving a piece of her somewhere she might finally be free. The next morning, we heard the rumors. Hitler was still in the city, still issuing orders, still deluded. Some said he'd fled. Some said he was in an underground bunker orchestrating a last stand. Nobody knew the truth, but it didn't matter. Our objective hadn't changed. We were going to the Reichstag. And as we packed up to move again, boots crunching on wet gravel, rifles slung over shoulders grown numb from carrying the same weight for too long, I felt the first real certainty I'd had in weeks. Something was waiting for us in that city, and we were going to face it. Together or not, we approached the outer districts of Berlin not as conquerors, but as men who had already given too much to feel triumph. The city revealed itself slowly, like a dying animal dragging itself into the open. Every street corner a wound, every shattered facade a grimace. There were no clear lines anymore. Front and rear had collapsed into one tangled mass of rubble, smoke, and desperation. Buildings leaned at unnatural angles, or had simply caved in on themselves, their interiors exposed like broken ribs. Civilians huddled in doorways, eyes glazed with a kind of numb expectancy, as if they had already seen the worst and now waited only to see who would claim the final blow. The roads were thick with ash, broken glass, and the twisted remains of vehicles abandoned during the retreat. German soldiers, mostly boys and old men now, fired from windows, rooftops, basements. They didn't fight like before. There was no discipline, no coordination, just frantic bursts of violence, wild ambushes, moments of suicidal fury followed by retreat or death. And yet, the resistance was relentless. Every intersection, every pile of debris, every subway entrance became a battleground. You never knew if the next corner would be silent, or if it would erupt in a hail of machine gun fire that shredded bricks and flesh alike. We were advancing down Frankfurter Allee, moving building by building. The smell was indescribable, rot and cordite, urine, oil, and something else, something human and final. The dead were everywhere, not just soldiers. Women, children, the elderly, caught in crossfire, buried under rubble, executed. The lines between combatants and civilians had blurred into something terrible. War wasn't just about uniforms anymore. It was about survival, or the lack of it. I remember one particular building. A tall, pale structure once home to offices or apartments. It had been blackened by fire and partially collapsed. We were clearing it floor by floor, methodical tense. On the third floor, we found a group of SS men holed up behind overturned desks, still holding the line as if they were guarding the gates of Valhalla. The firefight was brutal and fast, over in minutes, but when it was done and the smoke cleared, we found something none of us could quite explain. There was a room, small, windowless, lit by a single flickering bulb powered by a generator somewhere below. Inside were shelves stacked with boxes. Not ammunition, not rations, documents, photographs, names, lists, files stamped with swastikas and seals, evidence, crimes recorded in ink and paper. One of the files bore the name of a village I hadn't heard since 1941, Hudomira. My mother's sister lived there, or she had. I stood there for a long time, staring at the faded letters. It didn't bring her back. It didn't change anything. But it explained everything. The silence that came after her last letter. The hollow look in my father's eyes when I asked. All of it. Explained, and yet somehow still unbelievable. We pushed forward, through underground train tunnels and sewage canals, navigating through darkness that stank of sulfur and death. In those cramped spaces, the sounds of war were amplified, distorted, screams echoed forever, gunshots became thunder. We lost men down there, swallowed by the labyrinth beneath Berlin. One moment they were behind you, then a step too far, a misstep, and they were gone, sometimes without even a scream. Mines, booby traps, grenades wired to trip lines. It was like the city itself was trying to kill us. By the time we emerged, we were a shadow of our original unit. The sun had broken through briefly, casting the ruined skyline in an eerie golden light that made the destruction look almost sacred. The spires and domes of the inner city rose like ancient temples, some still defiant, others crumbling in defiance's wake. And then, finally, like something from a nightmare or a fevered vision, we saw it. The Reichstag. Its dome was blackened, its columns chipped and fractured, its once proud flags long torn down. It stood at the edge of the tear garden, surrounded by the wreckage of tanks, artillery shells, and a sea of broken cobblestones. It wasn't just a building, it was a symbol, and we all felt it. The final gate, the heart of the beast. Taking it meant ending the war, at least officially. But we knew it wouldn't surrender easily. Artillery began again as we approached, our own and theirs. The sky roared as if the heavens themselves had grown impatient. The ground trembled, not just from shells, but from something deeper, as if the earth was reacting to the sheer weight of history being carved into it by blood and fire. The final assault had begun. We were told to wait for nightfall, but no one did. A kind of madness had taken hold, a desperate urgency to finish it, to end the agony of waiting and dying inch by inch. The charge began almost organically, small groups moving forward, then larger waves, until it was a mass of men surging toward the great stone skeleton ahead. I don't remember how I got separated. One moment I was with my squad, the next I was crawling through a shattered trench line alone, smoke blinding me, bullets singing overhead. I found myself near the northern wing, where a collapsed facade had opened a path into the lower levels. There were voices inside, German, panicked, trying to coordinate. I slipped in through the rubble, heart pounding. Every shadow looked like an enemy, every sound a trigger. And then, in the flickering light of a burning wall, I saw them. 3 men, probably officers, standing over a map, shouting at one another. I didn't hesitate. My rifle barked once, twice, then the third stumbled back, grabbing at his chest, gurgling. They fell silently. I moved on. I reached the central hall. The massive dome above fractured like an eggshell, light bleeding through in pale shafts. Flags burned. Statues lay decapitated. And in the center of it all, a silence unlike any I'd known in years. No gunfire. No shouting. Just the sound of the building dying slowly, brick by brick. That's where I stopped. Knees shaking, hands numb. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel safe. I felt like I had outlived something I wasn't supposed to. And in that moment, surrounded by ruin and silence, I felt it. The war hadn't ended. Not really. It had just moved inside us. Outside the fractured bones of the Reichstag, the echoes of our last gunfire still hung in the heavy air like the residue of a final breath. The battle had ended, or at least we believed it had, but no one celebrated. Not really. There were no cheers, no laughter, no triumphant waving of flags like in the old newsreels they used to show back in '41, when we still believed that war was a series of victories strung together by songs and medals. What we had instead was the quiet, exhausted stillness of men who had run out of reasons to keep running, standing knee-deep in the ashes of what used to be history, and trying to convince themselves that this, whatever this was, somehow meant peace. Somewhere in the building, someone had found a flag, the red one, with a hammer and sickle, that had been passed from hand to hand, smeared with blood and soot, until it reached a young soldier from Siberia whose name I never learned. He climbed what was left of the interior staircase, which had partially collapsed, and then somehow managed to reach the highest accessible point. As he tied the flagpole to the jagged edge of the Reichstag's dome, it billowed in the smoky breeze, a red flame against the pale, broken sky. Others took photographs. Some scribbled their names on the stone walls. I didn't. I just stood there, watching that piece of cloth flapping above the ruins, feeling nothing and everything all at once. That night, or what passed for night in a city on fire, we camped among the wreckage. We laid our heads against chunks of marble and concrete, cradling our rifles like children's toys, unable to sleep, too afraid of dreams. There were fires still burning in the distance, but no more shells, no more screaming. Just the odd pop of a pistol echoing through the ruins. Suicides, most likely, among the last diehards or civilians who had nothing left to lose. The sky turned a strange orange, not from the sun, but from the endless glow of destruction that had become the city's new weather. I walked alone through the streets in the early hours, passing the remnants of monuments, the twisted iron of railings, the blackened husks of trams and cars that would never run again. I saw a woman kneeling beside a dead horse, trying to cut a piece of flesh from its leg with a broken jar of glass. Her hands were shaking, her hair singed, her dress torn and soaked in something that might have been water, might have been blood. She didn't look up as I passed. Neither of us said anything. There was nothing left to say. In one alley, I found a child, no more than 7 or 8, sitting on a broken crate, staring at a wall with the blank intensity of someone who had stared too long into the sun. His feet were bare and blistered, his coat several sizes too large. He didn't cry, just sat there, gripping a wooden spoon like it was a sword. I gave him a piece of my bread, and he took it without a word, without even blinking. I kept walking. I didn't look back. When I returned to what was left of our camp, the others were already beginning to disperse. Orders were coming down. Some were being reassigned to occupation units, others to clean up details. There was talk of trials, of capturing high-ranking officers, of parades in Moscow. But we, the ones who had reached the end, knew none of that mattered. The war might have been declared over in the coming days, documents signed, speeches made, but for us, the war had ended somewhere between Seelow and Berlin, in the thick mud and fire, in the shattered staircases and the craters filled with water and bones. It had ended not with victory, but with survival. I sat down beside what used to be a fountain, now dry and clogged with rubble. In my hand was Danilo's harmonica, the one I had picked up after his last breath. I hadn't touched it since, hadn't had the strength. But now, in that moment of bitter stillness, I lifted it to my lips. My fingers didn't know what to do. The first note came out cracked and hesitant. The second was worse, but I kept playing, clumsy and quiet, just fragments of a tune that no longer had a name. It wasn't a song for the dead. It wasn't even a song for the living. It was just sound, raw, broken, stubborn, like us. And then, almost imperceptibly, I felt something. A shift. Not in the world, not in the ruined city around me, but somewhere deep inside the hollowed-out shell that I now called myself. It wasn't peace, not yet, not even close. But it was the beginning of something. The first crack in the armor we had built around our souls. Maybe tomorrow I'd cry. Maybe next week I'd drink myself into forgetting. But right then, all I could do was sit in that dead city, beneath that red flag, and breathe. We stayed in Berlin for a few more days. I never saw Meyer again. Someone said he had been sent north. Others thought he had been killed in one of the last counterattacks. The truth was, no one really kept track anymore. Names blurred. Faces faded. All that remained was the march forward, even if we no longer knew where we were going. We were soldiers without a war, ghosts walking through a world that hadn't figured out what to do with us. When I finally left the city, weeks later, I didn't take anything with me. No souvenirs, no medals, no stolen trinkets from bunkers or command posts. All I carried was a photo of Danilo, creased, torn, still smiling, and the harmonica wrapped in a piece of cloth. That was enough. More than enough. Sometimes, when the nights are too quiet and the wind sounds like distant gunfire, I take that harmonica out again. Not to play, not really. Just to hold it, to remember. Not just the war, but the moments that didn't make it into the stories. The handshakes before battle. The laughter over burned soup. The silence after a friend's final breath. Those things linger longer than any anthem. So yes, I saw Berlin. I touched the Reichstag stone with bloodied fingers. I watched the flag rise. But the truth is, our last victory wasn't taking the city. It was walking away from it. Still breathing. Still human. Somehow,